All right. Last and I hope not least, do you want to summarize this? How many of you were here last night? What's left over from that assessment time? Any comments or questions? Thoughts, insights, awareness, observations?
I found myself reflecting on, like, when you asked the question, I'm like, oh, well, I think I do that or don't do that. I wonder if that's perceived by other people. Like, I wonder my perception of, yes, people can talk to me about their problems and they feel safe around me. Is that perceived by other people too? Like, do they perceive me as safe or do I just perceive me? You know, I found myself asking that question a lot. Like, well, I think I do this or that, or sometimes do this or that, but I wonder how that comes across to people who are close to me. I wonder if it's the same.
How would you find that out?
Ask.
There you go.
Yeah. I thought some people may be on
I could maybe type it up.
Because I'm thinking, I was scribbling fast and furious to try to keep up with you.
Sorry.
But I didn't have enough time to really reflect before we moved on to the next
So
one.
now you're talking about the presenter and not the material, but that's okay. I'm not sensitive.
I talked about this on the way home. I was like, I didn't really connect that well with the test and really reflect because I was
Sure.
scribbling madly to try to keep up.
What I'll try to do is put that in a just a form.
PDF
Okay.
or something. Yeah, because then I think we can wrestle with it a little bit. Because I did find that there was a chunk for me that I was like, ooh, you know,
All of us, by the way, all of us have stuff to work on.
right.
Always. And you know, it's like whack-a-mole. You'll take care of one and something else will show up. But I think that's how the Spirit of God teaches us.
Gently and what we can handle.
Yeah, and now you're ready for the next level. A lot of people think, that's why I said earlier, I'm not interested in you going back and exploring your inner child. I want you to work on your inner adult. Because I think the inner child will show up when it needs to. Thank you very much. Well, I believe a lot of times in my field, what we do is we go back and try to explore our histories. Try to go on a witch hunt or some such, try to figure out where the culprit is. I don't think you have to worry about that. I believe your mind will work in such a way that you present an opportunity for it to grow, and what's needed will show up. I don't think you have to go searching. I think it'll bubble up. And my belief is that's the way the Spirit of God teaches us. So, because I've seen people come to me and I would say, if I got to tell them what I thought they needed to do, which is not my job, I would have said, oh, this is the track you're going to have to take, and eventually you'll have to get to this point and deal with this stuff. But they're way over here, so I can't start over here and help them. It's not helpful. So if I start where they are, it's amazing how the stuff they need to deal with will come up in the process. And oftentimes it comes up way different than I think it will, and way earlier than I would have guessed that they could have managed it in some way. But most of you have probably had some experience somewhere where you had to deal with something and you were surprised that you could. And you go, wow, that was fun. I managed that pretty well. I got through a test. I did something I didn't think I could do, something out of your normal sandbox. And so here's an opportunity for you to do something different. So I think the learning process, if you lean into it and make it more normative, then becomes really helpful. If I was going to give you a synopsis of our time together, I hope that you would take away at least this one piece, that adults need to grow throughout their lifetime. It's a developmental task that's arduous, strenuous, demanding, and so gratifying, because you are going to be able to do more of what you were designed to do, which is to give life to somebody else. And that's the essence of joy. And that's giving your life to somebody else. That's all you have to give. You don't have anything else. You have what's been given to you to give away. And when it stops, it's kind of like constipation, I guess. It's not fun. Sorry. Do I have to go into explanation and all about that? Does that communicate? Sorry. Anyway. Trapped in your own body. Okay, so last night. Any other comments about last night?
I noticed going through there that, like, the stuff that was that would, kind of flag for me, or I noticed the initial sort of emotional tendency was to be sort of like scared of it, or ashamed of it, like, oh no, I shouldn't do that. But after I sort of started to assemble a decent list of those, I realized that the sort of like meta solution, or the meta kind of approach that would make pretty much any of them was if I would just own the responsibility of saying, don't be scared, I just go for it, and also have that sort of fearless orientation towards that journey. To say, hey, that capacity is in there, even if I don't think it is, and approach that sort of seemingly scary stuff with just an ownership of the process, to say, like, I'm going to do this on purpose because the only option other than that is to avoid it. And now that I know it's there, it's like you can kind of only ration forward or ignore it. And if you ignore it, you're screwed. You're just going to wither on the vine. So
Yeah.
my own observation.
No, I think you're right. I think it's how do I frame this so that I can utilize it, so that I can both access it and do something with it rather than back away from it, or back into it in some way. So, good. Any questions about that? Comments?
I have a question from today. You talked about, feel your emotions, name them, but don't let them sort of control you. I guess the question is twofold. I grew up definitely in a family system that was like, okay, you can feel these emotions are okay, these ones are not okay. Feel these ones wildly and just ignore these ones, or they don't exist. Like, if you're not, you're a little Christian girl. It's a sin kind of a thing. So, I guess my question, well, I guess, yeah, I would be tempted to feel wildly. You've taught me that there's not good emotions and bad emotions. There's heavier, lighter ones. The light, happier, right? Like, to feel those wildly and let those, but then to ignore the other side. What does that look like for a healthy person when you say feel your emotions, name them, but don't let them dominate you on either side, with the lighter or the heavier emotions?
You've heard my quote that I stole from somebody. That's now mine. Jesus was fully emotional, never moody. Moody. So what that means to me is he had this full wide band of emotional experience, from high highs to low lows, but the gyroscope in him was steady. That makes sense? We, on the other hand, typically do it the other way. We're afraid of emotion. So we squeeze down the emotional range to make it manageable. I can be this excited or this sad. That's it. Can't feel anything else. So if something dreadful happens, like a death or something, then you're not prepared for it. It's outside of the boundaries of your bandwidth. And your bandwidth won't handle what happens out here, so you're stuck. And your mood then has a tendency to be all over the place. So you kind of feel out of control. Well, I think we get those two confused. That's why I so like the statement. Fully emotional, never moody. So he wasn't a brooder, a la Paul Newman in HUD or Marlon Brando or one of those guys, out 100 years ago. It's my generation, sorry, just relax. That was last century. Get over it. And so I think the challenge for us is is to do what the Bible actually says. Cry with those who cry, rejoice with those who rejoice. And I felt like crying was not a good thing for a long, long time. My dad cried. I remember him crying. I mean, he wasn't a wildly emotional guy, but he was able to do that. He was affectionate with my mom. I mean, they showed affection physically and emotionally in the house. So those things weren't withheld, but they weren't wildly developed either. They were pretty narrow bandwidth. I've seen people grieve, deeply, deeply grieve. And so I actually have a couple books I haven't finished reading now one's about funerals and another one's about, I don't know, something related to that. Oh, it's the music we use around funerals, because Americans, by and large, don't have very good funeral ways to help people grieve. I mean, we don't help people grieve. Some cultures wail and they get out the band and they do trips around the block and have a big celebration of some kind. And we don't have those kind of patterns typically, or an Irish wake, for instance, or and all they are just ways to try to help handle this grief. And you'll see I don't mean this in any kind of bad way at all. I just know if you go to the Middle East and you watch them grieve, they have a specific way to mourn the tragedies that are happening to them. And now and then you'll get a taste of that. And it's a style, it's a form. It's not, oh, you should do that. It's just we don't have one. And so I think we're lost a lot of times, and it's because we don't have community around it. So I don't know if you go to concerts, but concerts a lot of times, or celebratory times, when you have this relational crowd around you that's all exuberant together, or they're able to dance in place or put their hands up or whatever. Okay, or if you go to, I like opera. If you've ever been to operas, and when the scene ends, what do? I mean, they're whistling and yelling bravo and all kinds of stuff, I mean, it's just like a bullfight almost. You're going, whoa, this is a music hall. What are you doing? Well, they're celebrating, they're expressing, etc. So I have 4 words I use with emotion, and maybe it's worth taking a sidebar. You intimated it. You can express them, which is usually shouting, raising your voice, throwing something, using stronger language, expression, slamming doors, driving fast. Road rage would be an expression of an emotion, right? You can repress an emotion, which is not healthy. It's where you say, that didn't hurt, or I'm fine, perfectly fine. And you're dying on the inside, but you don't know it, can't get in touch with it. You've repressed it in some way. Or, you get fired from a job and you say, well, it didn't matter. You're just avoiding that. Suppression is another option with emotion. Suppression is oftentimes an okay thing and can be an adult thing. You suppress the emotion until a proper time to process it. I had a good friend whose wife got a doctorate and he didn't have one. And they were both counselors, and they played doubles tennis together, and they were on the tennis court. He said something pretty snide and cutting to her, and it was a hurtful comment during their play, and she thought about it quickly, and she tells the story later. She said, I wanted to say something then, but it just wasn't the right place. So she did what to her emotion? She suppressed it and waited until they were in the car going home, and she asked this question. Instead of judging him and jumping to a conclusion about what it felt like, she said to him, at first she asked permission to ask him. She said, may I ask you a question? He said, sure. And she said, I thought I heard you say this on the court. Can you help me understand what you meant? And he said, oh my gosh, I did say that, didn't I? I'm not exactly sure what that meant. But he said, I'll think about it and we'll talk about it again. So the next day or so, he got back to her. He said, you know, I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure it's because I felt like you're going to leave me. She said, what? He said, well, you got your doctorate. And I don't have one, so why would you stay with me anymore? Well, you know, ensued in a whole other conversation. But what she did was she suppressed the feeling long enough to process it. And come to find out, it didn't have anything to do with tennis, but had to do something with his fear, insecurities. And they gave him a grand opportunity to work on it. But the healthiest way to deal with emotion is to confess them. Confession simply means to agree with whatever you're feeling. If you don't know what you're feeling, you need to figure it out. If you're flat, can't figure it out, then you need some help. You need to take my theatrics course or something, you know, to learn how to feel. I had to go through a doctorate, I think, basically to learn how. And that's, you know, that wasn't the end all, but it was certainly a start for me. And I realized how many places I had isolated myself simply to protect myself, simply because I had insecure models, etc., closed system models. So, yeah.
Confess it and express them sounds similar to me. Can you help me make sure I understand the difference?
Confession is saying, I'm angry. Expression is, you piss me off. How's that? You know, or you make me so mad. Well, then I'm blaming you, pushing my emotion off onto you. You're the cause of my emotion. The truth is, nobody causes your emotion. Your emotion is yours. Own it. And when you own it, that's what confession means. It means I'm owning the fact that this is true about me. And then you can do whatever you need to do with it. You know, I'm upset, but it's okay. You know, apparently that guy's having a bad day. I remember driving to church one Sunday morning, and we lived about 2 blocks from the church, so I don't know why I drove, but it was Texas and hot, and that was my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. Anyway, I'm late. 2 blocks from the church, right? I'm late? Really? Why are you late? Well, because you're an idiot. But, you know, so I was late, pinched for time. Here we go, that Isaiah 28 passage I was talking about last night, not be in a hurry. So I'm squishing down this piece of the puzzle, and this car's in front of me, and it's a Buick with a big butt. You know, I mean, it's so big it takes 3 lanes, and whoever's driving, it's right in the middle of the road. And the road has cars on both sides, and I was tempted to just get up on the sidewalk and drive. You know, if I'd had my truck today, I'd have done it. But I was upset. I was so exercised by the time I got through with those 2 blocks, I could hardly see straight. And I looked over and saw the person driving that car was a little old lady. And I thought that could have been my mother, who, by the way, pulled up to a stoplight in Denver years ago and went to sleep. And she kind of relaxed when she went to sleep, of course. And their car, she was in the left-hand turn lane. The car kind of pulled across the street, ran in the curb on the other side of the street. It was on Alameda and Wadsworth, and there was a policeman sitting right there, and he went over to her and he said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, what, you know." He said, "Well, you need to go home and take a nap." You know, he didn't give her a ticket. But it's. I just thought, would I have felt the same way? Now watch my application. Would I have felt the same way if I had known that was my mother? Grow up is what I was trying to get at myself. So for feelings, it seems like to me, artists get crammed into this corner where they can feel deeply both ends of the scale. And they're hard to handle as a result because they're so far out there all the time. Sorry. It's okay, Tara. You're not the only one in this room.
But I think the artists feel sorry for the people who don't express their emotions.
That's
They feel like
exactly.
they say, you guys are missing out on all the fun stuff. I don't like the negative part, but I get to enjoy the fun part more than you, and you're just kind of neutral. And they feel sorry for us.
Yeah. Well, think
And
of.
I think, well, okay, I'm watching that up and down, up and down. I'm okay with you. That's
If
fine.
you're-
I'll live here and
If you're going to eat today and you stay, I made barbecue sauce, and it is bitter sweet, and that's what life is. And you'll be surprised if you look around how much of life falls into that dual category. You know, the positive and the negative, and we really like it, sweet and sour. You know, in terms of food, and we put those flavors together all the time, and it's what makes the rhythm of life make sense. Yeah.
A quick question, just about healthy communication. You mentioned that nobody else can make you feel something, and it's so easy, I know for myself, to be like, Brian, whenever you do that, it makes me feel, or you're making me feel that. But to reframe that, is it, will you give me healthier language, sort of like, when this happens, I find myself feeling
Yeah.
this way. Is that like a better way to?
That would be, or I'd say something like, I'm angry, I'm aware I'm irritated, I'm afraid, and I want to blame you. Can we talk about it? The point is, if I blame somebody else, you're going to defend yourself because I'm accusing you. If, on the other hand, I own my own feeling, and I invite you, here's that language again, I invite you back into the conversation, you're less defensive. You're likely to say, wow, I didn't know that when I did that does that to you, you know. Nancy and I have an ongoing discussion around a little thing that we do, a dance that we do that we should be ashamed of, but we're not. And, but we keep toying with it because we know it's not healthy. And it has to do with blaming the other person for how we feel at that moment. We're very reactive. And this started early in our marriage, and there's no excuse for it, but we still fall into it now and then.
Speaking about, I have a child that has a hard time expressing his emotions. The blame comes from, we don't know how to handle the feeling, we don't know how to express the feeling that we're feeling, so we want to push it off on somebody else so they can fix it for us.
Right. And if I can blame anybody, I don't have to grow up. That just stops your development, basically. What feelings do, I think they're like dashboard lights. I had one mechanic, he said, those are idiot lights, because they don't tell you a thing, really. They're signals that something's going on. But you have to check out what it really represents. And a lot of times the sensors are bad or something else. I mean, they're useful. So God made us that way. And they're obviously core because they're so primitive in our brain design. So it's not like they're wrong, but they are there to notify us of stuff that's happening in some way. And so I think learning how to navigate this area, or I would call it managing your own emotional system, is so significant. And if you can help a child with that, it's beyond priceless. There's a guy who wrote a book called Emotional Coaching for Children. His name's John Gottman, and I have no idea what the book title is now. It was Emotional Coaching, and now maybe. Yeah, I think so, maybe. They've changed the title 2 or 3 times. And he, by the way, just stumbled onto the research. I mean, it wasn't out to study it. It just came up in research that he was doing with couples. But he found that you can emotionally coach your child to be more attuned to their own world, more aware of what they where they are and what's going on with them and what they need to do and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I was just say, it's interesting because we're talking about how we can each process our emotions in the healthy and unhealthy ways, but also it takes two, because anytime you express an emotion, how someone else reacts to that, even if it's in a healthy way. So you say, I'm just really angry, and someone goes, well, you shouldn't be. I mean, that just denies that you have an emotion. And so, there's also a second part of that is how we also help take that in and how we can help someone process that, because the response we give is very key, I would think.
Well, like if somebody said you shouldn't be, what's the response to that that's healthy? Yeah, don't should on me today. Sorry, no shoulding. That was actually a cruel picture above a little nun's desk. It said, "I will not should on myself." And the Mother Superior made her take it down, I think. But it came out in the book. No, it's if we're uncomfortable in our own skin, we will not be comfortable with somebody else having feelings. And I think if you can normalize this emotional piece, it is the greatest thing you can do. Tell a kid, you darn right you should be angry or hurt or upset, or that hurts, man. That's a bummer. Now what are you going to do with it? That's the follow-on. But the synchronization of identifying with that reality at the moment is a huge thing. So in relationship, you're right, it exposes us, but it exposes our comfort level. I remember watching a lady friend of mine that got me into ministry, actually. She had taken care of her sister who had died probably 10 years before or more. And she was talking about her and she was crying. And I thought, that's inappropriate. You should be over your grief. Why are you crying? Well, I've learned since then that that's not true. It's appropriate to cry about her every time you think about her. Why wouldn't it be? That's why grief, once started, never ends. It's a process of acknowledging the fact that this was important. It's important in your life. It's important in your soul. Don't minimize it. Don't minimize it for you. Don't minimize it for them. And the same with forgiveness. Forgiveness is the same thing. Forgiveness as a relational tool is probably the greatest single tool the Bible gives us. And it's the most misused, misunderstood, misapplied single relational tool we have. We miss the healing it can bring. We miss the reintegration. And that's why people want to start over. They want a do-over. Let's begin again. But forgiveness is there because you can't help but hurt one another in your journey. And when you do, you need to heal that. And healing it means to rebuild trust. Trust is alive, just like your brain is alive or anything else. It needs to be nurtured. And if you think trust is static and given in a legal sense, you're missing it. Trust is alive. It needs to be handled in a way that feeds it. But most people can't rebuild trust because they don't trust very well in the first place. And that's what's happening with kids. If they can't trust themselves, their joy's gone. Trust is a relational construct. It has to do with how we do relationships. So it's everywhere you look. Trust becomes a huge issue. I've got half a dozen books written from leadership on trust, and they're all fascinating. How to build a high trust leadership, how to infuse this into your organization, or whatever however it goes. But this is the tough stuff of making this stuff work. And so I think learning to own it and find language to say, this is where I am. Can you help me? Will you enter into this space with me to help me with this? Yeah, I want to blame you. Yeah, I think it's your fault. But I know that I have to do something with it. I'm the one that has to live with this feeling, not you. How am I doing?
That owning and that processing part, I'm just chewing through it because look at these 4 words used with emotion. most of them are pretty positive. The only one that I see that's just outwardly negative would be the repression of it. But they can all also, I mean, they can be negative in how they're expressed or how they're suppressed. And we look at Jesus and we see him get angry multiple times. And then we hear the words, be angry and sin not. So be frustrated and sin not. Be sad and sin not. And it's just that confession part that I'm kind of chewing through in my mind is, the agreeing with it and then the expressing of it that doesn't take us to a place that's missing the mark.
That's right. So let's look. Scripture actually has a lot to say about feelings. And there's one passage that I think exposes a lot of this stuff. Let's see if we can't do this. Because it's so, I don't know, it's so central to our dance. So there's anger,
What's
fear.
the header for this?
What's that?
What's the header for this?
Just talking about emotions from a scriptural standpoint. Shame, guilt, depression. Okay? These two emotions are pretty important. The reason they're important is because from a biblical standpoint, Christ took care of the guilt. The shame should be off the table. Okay? Listen to what it says in Romans 8. There's therefore now no condemnation, no shame. And this is, I mean, when the text says in Samuel, 1 Samuel 12, it says, Nathan says to David, God has taken away your guilt or your sin. That's what he's done. He's removed this, okay? Which is what Jesus did on the cross. Okay, so if this is gone, I should be functioning out of wholeness down here, which means that I have the full range of emotions and I'm okay in my own skin, right? Anger and fear then become these anti-relational feelings. So here's what the scriptures say. 400 times it says, don't fear. Be not afraid, fear not. Anger, on the anger side, go to James chapter 1, verse 19, and it says something like this. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So even if you're properly angry, and you ought to, there's righteous anger all the time. Look around you. Look at the injustice in the world. You and I live in the richest country in the world, in Earth's history. If you have more than one pair of shoes, you're rich. The average person in the third world, the world has 7.7 billion people in it. The average person in the world right now lives on $1,500 a year. Average. That's $3 a day or something. $3, I don't know what it is, but it's not much. Could you live on that? Not in our context. I mean, I don't have any idea. Why was I born here, not there? Make sense out of this stuff. You have to make sense out of it theologically. So when I'm looking at this, I thought, why are these so troublesome? This fear and anger. Why do they stay so potent in Scripture? Paul says in Ephesians, he says, in your anger, or when anger occurs in you, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Do you know what the next line is? Don't give Satan an opportunity. Okay, so he's telling you something. He's telling you, you got to do something with this feeling. You're going to have it. He says, when you're having this feeling, in your anger. So I looked up where he got this. Paul gets this from Psalms 4, which is an 8-verse psalm. And it reads something like this, Psalms 4, verse 4. It says, tremble. What are the two emotions, if they're strong enough, make you shake? Anger and fear. If you're frightened enough, you're going to shake. And if you're angry enough, you're going to shake. He says, so he picked out one of those and applied it in Ephesians. But both of them show up in the Psalm. And here's how the verse reads in Psalms. Tremble, so have your feeling. Don't sin. Same words. And then he gives you 4 things to do. Meditate in your heart, on your bed, and be still. What are those 4 things telling you to do? Rest, increase space, slow down, listen, dig a little deeper. Why? Here's why. The Bible and the God of the Bible is primarily a relational book. So all we've been talking about is how do you do a better relationship with yourself so you can do better relationships with others, because the core of relationship is right here. It's joy, and it's predicated on your ability to identify who you are, that you are a valuable, significant, honorable, worthwhile person. And frankly, most people don't feel that. So what I think is happening in Psalms is he's telling you these 2 feelings are counter relationship. One, anger pushes you away. Fear, you run away. So either adds distance. Okay, so we get that part down. And then they go on in the psalm and he says, you know, if you get this, you'll have gladness in your heart. The word gladness there is a substitute for this word joy. God will put gladness in your heart, and he says, greater than the very best food and wine you can buy. So the very best you can buy, he'll give you more gladness than that. And then at the very end, the psalm ends with this line. He said something like, you'll both lie down and sleep in peace. What a great line. Lie down and sleep. Sometimes we lie down and don't sleep, right? And certainly not in peace. So, here's these 2 feelings that we assume are normal. And I'm going to make a case that will say, this is not how we were designed. We were not designed to have to deal with this. We were not designed to be defensive and self-protective, nor were we designed to have to deal with anger or fear. That's why they're so troublesome. That's why there's so much talk about it. That's why God says, come alongside with me. If you see the world as I see it, you will be at peace. Jesus says to his disciples in John 14, the Gospel of John 14, he says something like this. He's telling them at the very end of his life, he's getting ready to leave. He knows he's getting ready to leave. They don't get it yet. He's tried to tell them about 15 different ways. They still don't get it. The girls get it. The guys don't. So that says something. But anyway, he's still trying to get it across to these crazy disciples that he's taken off. And he says, I'm going to leave you. And he says, what are you going to need when I'm gone? Do you know what he gives them? Peace. He says, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives. He says, let not your heart be troubled. Don't be all agitated and upset about what's going on circumstantially in the world. Don't stop at happiness. Drive yourself down into the rooted, solid core of joy and experience my peace. Do you know what he knew about what his disciples were going to face? Do you know what they faced? Martyrdom, all but one. John's the only one that didn't face martyrdom. He knew they were going to face it. Why did he offer them peace and not power? Scratch your head about that one. I mean, go blow them up, man. I mean, survive. Get rid of Rome. Do something, And I think that's what they thought should occur. But it's because these are non-productive. They will not produce what your soul desires. But they are indicators that something's going on. So when they show up as a mature and maturing adult, you have an opportunity to say, this is a signal. This means something. Where is this coming from? What gives it the energy? Just like I was saying yesterday. If a guy's hooked on pornography, you want him to find out where is the energy source for this. Because there will be no transformation in his soul unless he can get at that. What the curiosity that drew him into it in the first place is probably not present 30 years later. It just isn't going to be there. It's going to be some other driving piece of the puzzle. And so I just think you have to come back to this and say, wow, what is this about? How am I doing? Does this make sense?
That's good.
This piece of the puzzle is enormous. Read that 8-verse psalm, because it's stunning what it says about, I will both lie down in peace and, lie down and sleep in peace. And it's because I have access to this gladness that's been given to me. Hello? How many people do you know live out of joy, into joy, out of joy, regardless of what the setting is? It's the relational peace that we're given. And most of us isolate. So I work with pastors all the time. You know the number one issue with pastors? They're isolated. Number one. It's the greatest distorter of perception there is on the face of the earth. You want course correction? You want more input into your life? Then be in a bigger relational circle. Sorry, more eyes will give you more input. It's just the way it is.
Good.
I think too, another reason why we don't have joy, I think is because we do too much. We always talk about the children in Africa, that their smiles and they're laughing, and we see a joy in them. I feel like in America, we are surrounded by too much, which just occupies our mind, maybe dealing with the bigger issues,
Well, there's actually studies about happiness in Africa. That Africans, the poorer they are, the more happy they are. Go figure, right? I don't know how, the studies are crazy, actually, because they're not controlled and everybody's definition is different, but it gets at what you're pointing at, Why is it so difficult for us who are so engorged with lavishness in our lives? I'm trying to sort through my garage. I'm glad Nancy's not in here, What's that?
You can't see your own butt.
Yeah, you can't.
I'm surprised you haven't used that yet.
I have been thinking it. Well, I hate to use it because I used it for a seminar one time as a title, and people remembered the title, not the seminar. So I've been really careful ever since. So, well, you can't see that stuff, and like books. We were joking about books. I've got books I don't need, obviously. I just got a trillion of them. I'm never going to look at half of them again. So I'm trying to sort through them. I'm starting. I finally got the boxes in my office, but they've just been sitting there. It's an arduous task, and I don't want to just throw them away willy-nilly, and But here's the fun part. I go away months at a time traveling. And I live out of a suitcase, and I do just fine. And I don't have any of those books. And I was asked to do literally 24 talks, 60-minute talks, 45-minute talks. And I didn't have any time to go back to my office and get any notes. And I did just fine. Which told me, you're probably trusting things you don't need to trust, and loosen your grip, Mac. Just let go. Open your hands. Come on. Don't worship this stuff. Don't tie it into you as if it's yours. Your kids aren't yours by ownership. Your stuff isn't yours. Open your hands. Live in that way. You want freedom? This is where it lies. It lies right there. And then you can work out of the best in you. You're free to do that. One of the reasons we've stayed debt-free over our lifetime, the fundamental reason was a historical, sociological reason. I knew no freedom would there be in my life if I was in debt somewhere. Now, I've obviously had a mortgage on a house, and bought a couple cars that I had to take some loans out, but I could have gotten rid of all that stuff and gone away if somebody had said, you can't teach this way, or you can't act that way, or you can't say this. I wanted the freedom. And I think when you talk about emotional freedom, then to check the anger and the fear in your world. I don't think God gets angry. I don't think Jesus got angry. I think they are angry at sin. I think God is angry at sin. And yeah, I don't think he has to work it up. I think it's a surprise to us. We get angry at stuff. But because he sees good and evil, and he knew we weren't trained to do that and equipped to do that, when we walked out of the garden, it messed us up big time. And so this is where it comes from. And so we get it all lopsided. And you'll get a whole section of the church that's really into social justice, which is terribly needed and very important and very significant, but it's only part of the story. There's the stuff we're talking about as well, the internal stuff that can't be measured on the outside. There's not a metric for it. And you don't know what's happening with people. So when I do this stuff, it's hard to say this is what people need, or this is how you'll grow, or this is what makes this worth it. Sometimes when people ask me what my fee is, I almost choke. It actually should be more in terms of the profession, but I still think it's way too much because I can't measure the outcome. In the last couple months, I've had 4 or 5 calls from people that I haven't talked to for 30 years. But because I was faithful in that and trying to steward what I knew 30 years ago, there was a bridge of trust built, and so I get a phone call 30 years later. Maybe it's about their kid, maybe it's about some other kind of thing. I mean, this one guy told me his name, and I'm just going, I am not believing this at all. And he says, you're the only guy I could think of that could probably solve this problem. I spent 10 minutes on the phone with him and get this long letter back. He said, you have transformed our family. And they are taking care of, as grandparents, they're taking care of their grandkids who have been wildly out of control. And within, he said, less than a month, he said they're just like transformed kids. All I did was give him some boundary containment things for these kids, which they desperately needed. But I gave him a way to do it that was going to be a draw rather than a push. It wasn't about power control. Am I making sense? You guys are all going, can we eat? Is that what you're going? Okay, so this is the application of this. This is why I want to talk about this. This is why I want to challenge you to say, and I'm thankful for this, because I think what trips us up a lot of times is we think this is normal. Normal. And I would say, in a fallen world, this is not okay. It's normal in a fallen world, but it's not what should be. And why we have so much trouble with it is because we're not designed to have to mess with it. God's holiness generates his wrath toward what's wrong. But even his way of restoring that is pretty profound if you study it. And we're so slipshod with that stuff, it's just crazy. I can give you some resources that'll help you not blame God for all the craziness in the Old Testament. And there's plenty of craziness in the Old Testament. Anyway. Questions? I could keep talking. What am I talking about?
In talking about maturity, it's really learning how to face these things, deal with these things, do something with these things when we approach them. When we find ourselves depressed, if we're depressed, there's times it's a completely legitimate feeling. It's what we do with it.
Yeah, I call it bona fide depression.
Yeah. And so, the topic, of anger. I mean, there's times it's a legitimate feeling. But what do you yourself said, what do you do with it? You can't just, when fear hits you, when anger hits you, they got to be dealt with. They got to be addressed. You can't just ignore them and think that you're going to be in a healthy place, or even that that's necessarily a mature response, because I don't believe that is. And I think that could be the full scope. Those are just the negative emotions, but even there's happy emotions. In the midst of happy emotions, they can be dealt with the way that they could turn to be unhealthy.
Well, you know, there's a great verse, not just one, but this verse is Paul talking to Timothy, and he says, it's 1 Timothy 4:4, he says, everything God created is good when it's used the way it's designed to be used. This is my translation of that verse. You're sitting in a chair, it's designed to be used that way, you're sanctifying it, that makes the chair good. Make sense? Sex is a good thing when it's used the way it's designed to be used, but look at all the ways it can be misused, right? I could kill you with a pin. That's not the way a pin's designed to be used, but it can be used that way. So things have to be, we have to figure out what things are for. That's why we're talking about emotion right now. Emotion is this piece of the puzzle that needs to be what? Sanctified, if you will. So it's there for a reason. And I think part of it is to be able to praise God, to be able to rejoice, to be able to weep with him, see what he sees, and ache over what he aches over, and identify the pain that people go through, and not be indifferent to it. You know, it's to make you whole and human, and sensitive and aware. And you know, you can traffic in this stuff. The hard part for me is, as a caregiver, is you can become calloused and indifferent to people after a while. You just have cared for so many. It's just, you think, wow, here's another batch, you know. And I think, oh gosh, now we're going to have to talk about relationships again. Well, everybody's at a different place, and relationships never go away, and so on. So maybe we should talk just a little bit about how this applies to grief. Okay, if I can do this quickly. This is the difference between the world's grief and what I call biblical grief. So I'll put the world's grief here. And that Kubler-Ross did this study. She was a sociologist. And she said there are 5 ingredients in grieving in the American world, and they were common, and they kept showing up. And so what were the 5, do you know? Shock, anger, depression, bargaining. How am I doing? Something like that. Bargaining? Sorry. And the last one? Acceptance. Okay, so how many people on the face of the earth that have been born have not died? Yeah, okay, so there's us. We're part of the experiment, right? We're right in the middle of it. That's right. Why are we so shocked? I know people that have never been to a funeral. More than you'd imagine. Never been to a funeral. Never been around a dead person. But it's a big business. When I was in college, I worked in a mortuary in Greeley. I was a night watchman, and I sang for the services. People pick out the craziest music for services. You think, this is not appropriate. But you asked for it, so I'm going to give it to you. You just go, oh my gosh, really? Okay, so when Kubler-Ross did this, it it's just stood the test of time, and people keep teaching it, et cetera. And this is what grief is supposed to be like. And when you accept it, you're supposed to be over it, right? And I think there's a number of things wrong with this, and the biggest thing I'm going to tell you is, right,